Thank you so much. It's a great honor and privilege to be here at the summit. I want to thank the Reagan Institute for offering us this opportunity to participate. Frankly, the previous panel was a great tee-up for this panel. And let me explain why. Because you might be sitting there thinking, why are we hearing from boards of education? What role do they really support? A lot of times, boards exist in sort of this mysterious space. We know they're not the legislature. We also know they're not necessarily the ones that run the educations. They sit in that spot between legislative policymaking and actual implementation by departments of education. But they have policymaking power and authority. And I think if you are like me and you heard what Megan said in the previous panel, you said to yourself, we can do better. We can do better. And that's what a state board might say. They might hear a story like Megan's or other Megans out there and say, we can do better. And then they can begin to ask questions. Look at research, look at data, look at best practices. And that's actually what we're going to talk about. In keeping with the conference theme, this session is about connectivity. So the big idea that I want you to come away with in this session is that positive connections between students and their peers, between students and caring adults in their schools, is hugely important to their academic success and their success in life and beyond schooling. And so, interestingly enough, we have 4 state board members. Now, you might say, wait a minute, 2 of these board members are different from the other 2, right? 2 of them are actually student board members. This speaks to Kira's question earlier on about how can students engage in the policymaking experience. And here you have 2 great examples of exactly that. Now, not every state has students on their boards of education. So one thing we could all do is advocate for more state boards to have students as part of their organizations influencing the policy debate. So they are wearing 2 hats at this session. They're wearing that hat of being a student. So they're going to be the ones that actually reflect on that idea of connections and how important those are to their academic success, to their success in being prepared for what comes next. And then the non-students are going to weigh in from a policy perspective and say, how can state policy and other governmental policies, whether it's local, whether it's federal, have an influence in creating the conditions? And I draw on the Deputy Superintendent's words. She talked about our role as creating the conditions for student success, and these are among those kinds of conditions. How do we create the conditions for these positive connections to exist and to allow students to succeed so that that experience that Megan has, we can minimize or even reduce or even eliminate the likelihood that that's going to happen. So, as I said, we are blessed to have 4 amazing Board of Education members. Kevin Bokum is the student member of the Maryland State Board of Education. He just recently graduated from East Hagerstown High School. Or is it North Hagerstown High School? Yeah. And he is on his way, starting in August, to Harvard University. Soliana Mesfin is a graduate of Eastern High School, and she's on her way to start at University of Louisville. Yes, go ahead and applaud. She participated in their Family and Consumer Management Career Pathway, which actually is, I've always found that the career pathways oftentimes have really strong connections between students and teachers, students and other students. Then we have Dr. Karen DuBois Walton, who is the chair of the Connecticut State Board of Education. Her background is as a clinical psychologist, did work for the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I have to tell you that I think it's amazing to have someone with a mental health, behavioral health background on a State Board of Education and chairing it. And Marisa Perez Diaz is a member of the Texas Board of Education. She also has a background in child welfare and sociology, was also employed as a district administrator, and so brings that perspective to bear to the policymaking arena. So I'm going to start with the students. And so, Kevin, I'll start with you, but Soliana, you can prepare a response to the same question. What does connection actually mean to you, and how do you value it? What is its impact and importance?
So when I think about the word connection, I look back to whenever we first started through the pandemic. First of all, that question of connectedness was challenged in so many ways. Basically, you were thrown into a void. You didn't know what to do for 2 weeks, even longer. Thrown from that realm of connectiveness that you had before with your parents, your teachers, your peers who are in the school, who serve as that role model, who serve as that forum that you can relate to and talk to. And then when you're thrown into that void, you really see you're kind of cut of that connectiveness, which really was really impactful for me. And it really made me like examine like, oh, really, who are my true friends if they aren't talking to me? Like, they stopped talking to me as soon as like school ended. And then whenever that stopped, really like reflecting on that word connectiveness, I recall like missing those little cafeteria moments where you could talk to your friends across the table, have those small little conversations about classwork or material, which would honestly help you more comprehend what the teacher was saying. And then just going after class, going to a teacher, talking to them about whatever was going on in your personal life with the material you've been assigned. That really was all part of that connectiveness that really got cut off and eliminated. And then as we went through the pandemic, through virtual school, teachers tried in different ways to really get that form of connectiveness back, whether it was like coming in early to Zoom classes, staying later, and that was really impactful because it made that small bit of connection pop back, which had been lost, and then continuing as we came back, having all these COVID restrictions, you had to sit so far away from like your fellow student, your fellow peer. It's like 6 feet, 12 feet even, and then it's like I miss those cafeteria moments. Where are those? Having to also like wear a mask or your process of eating and all that impacted the connectivity. But really, as I look at it, it was really a challenge to try to have that connectivity back, because connectivity serves more than just as a word. It serves more as just like a facet of life. It's actually the way we interact. It's the way we seek support too. And I know that I personally seek support even through that age of disconnect, through really turning to my teachers, even if they're in that small Zoom box over there. But it was really nice. I was going on to talk to my counselors for the first time, even though I never talked to them before. It really expanded that connectivity in a sense.
I love the way you use the word support, because I think even one of the previous panelists talked about asking for help, and that's what that support system is really so essential about. Yeah. So Liana, reflect on the same question. What do connections, what kind of impact do they have for you, and what does a good quality connection actually look like?
Yeah, so when I think about the word connectivity, when I think about the concept in general, I'm drawn to the word individuality. And it's about the school system providing for students and not, assuming that students are a monolith or, assuming that they know the broad range of needs for their students, which is important because every student is different. Every student needs different stuff. They need individual support for their aspirations. And in order to achieve that, we need to have relationships. And I'm big on relationships because I don't believe that simple interactions will go the mile, and having a relationship with, a diverse range of stakeholders in that school building alone. We have custodians, we have counselors, we have teachers, and using each other's expertise to not only, progress you forward, but to, educate your peer, educate those around you. And so when I think about what it does for you as a student, I've been in that situation, in situations where I felt no support by my school system, and there were other times that I did feel support. And I could always say that when I didn't feel the support, I felt as if I couldn't exist outside of the school system, and I couldn't prosper, and I couldn't succeed. And so, it's really just going about it through this holistic sense. You are not just a student when you're in this school. I take you as a human, I take your aspirations seriously, and I want to make sure that when you're outside of this school building, outside of academics, I want you to succeed and I want you to go to big places. And so it's really caring about the student for as long as, even later for after they leave the school building.
It really amplifies what the Deputy Secretary was saying about meeting the needs of the whole child, right? Exactly the thing you've described. It's not just an academic experience. It's a support infrastructure around you that's that's committed to helping make you successful, right? So as this conversation continues to unfold, I'm always a believer that people in the audience ought to be tuned in, not just to learning about what's happening, but also committing to take action. So I want you to think about, so by the end of this session, I want you to have one idea about a little step you could take. Maybe it's listening to more student voices in the work that you do. Maybe it's encouraging schools to be more attentive to building those strong connections and making sure they exist, or whatever area you work in. And that's going to be my challenge to you. Karen, I want to go to you now.
Yes.
You have an august position of being the chair of the Connecticut Board of Education, but you also bring with you this whole host of knowledge about mental health. What are the policy implications of this concept of connectivity, and what are the kinds of things Connecticut can do and maybe is doing to create the conditions, as the Deputy Secretary said, for more of this to occur?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. You know, I try to approach the work, I guess informed by my background as a psychologist, that learning happens in relationship.
Yeah.
And that learning happens best when students feel connected and feel a sense of belonging. And I think at whatever level we're working at, we have a role in ensuring that our classrooms, at our settings, at our out-of-school settings, promote that sense of connection and belonging. And you know, I draw on, one thing I think, because we've all been students, we carry with us those experiences, good and bad, that are formative about sort of what worked and what didn't work. I can remember being in a 7th grade social studies class, and I have historically had experience of being the only little black child in my classrooms. And I can recall this lesson where European history was being presented by the teacher, and the teacher said, and now we're going to study Europe, where all of our ancestors came from. And I can remember going home and sharing with my mom. I was one of those families that go home, my mom would always ask, you know, what did you learn in school today? And I can remember parroting back to her that, you know, the teacher said we were starting a new lesson on Europe, where all of our ancestors came from. And I think her head was going to explode. It was like, now you can think about that from the perspective, well, I'm the only black student in there, and this teacher isn't used to having a black student. But you need to know that the town I grew up in was adjacent to a Seneca Nation reservation, and a third of my classmates were Native students. So not only was he, for years and years and years, teaching that lesson with me now in the classroom, but he'd been teaching it with Native students in the classroom forever and ever who also weren't claiming heritage in that way. I carry that with me, that sense of like what it felt like to not feel connected to that lesson, to not feel seen in that classroom, that it was just like my history didn't even exist in there. It was just sort of blended into something else. And so I think as a policymaker, I think about what are we trying to do? I think my goal for Connecticut, which people don't always think of as the most diverse state, well, Connecticut, our student body is 51% students of color. And so we as state board members need to be promoting policies that are going to ensure that every student in our state has culturally relevant education. We are very proud to have a really student-led initiative that got mandatory in all high schools, Black and Latino history passed. And now in the following year came back and got AAPI history, so Asian American Pacific Islander history passed now, and a curriculum being built out and rolled out for all districts. I believe that for students to feel that sense of belonging and connection, they need to be taught by educators who represent the diversity of the student body. And so we have a very active, and we're facing the same teacher shortage and pipeline issues that are happening across the country. So we've got a number of amazing initiatives that are trying to grow our own and trying to create new certification processes and move para-educators who tend to be much more diverse in background into certified education very quickly so that our students are taught by teachers who reflect that diversity. We're working to try to diversify. We're still a very segregated state. Our housing and our education is still very segregated. We're trying to work to ensure that every student has an opportunity to sit in classrooms where they can interact with students of different backgrounds. So things that are looking at some of the really third rail issues in politics around zoning and housing policy and how that intersects with school districting so that we can advance that opportunity. And then the sense of belonging. I'm a psychologist by training. How we ensure that our students have access to the full range of supports that are beyond what they're going to learn in the curriculum, but are the ways in which they feel supported in in their social emotional needs and their recreational needs, how they have opportunities to connect with peers and adults.
Yeah. I love the theme that you call out because there's a huge equity consideration in this notion of connectivity. It can't be connectivity just for some students that happen to find that relationship. We have to really identify those ways where every student can feel connected, and sometimes that takes extraordinary attention to the particular needs and particular context. Marisa, tell us how things are going in Texas, and again, from your point of view as a district administrator, what are the kind of things districts do and schools do to kind of create these conditions?
Well, thank you so much for the question. I think I'm on a panel learning so much already from different states that I think are, quite frankly, a little bit ahead of the curve than from where Texas is right now. We have a lot of work to do in terms of student voice at the state level, but so much of what Karen you've shared at the policy level that's happening in Connecticut has happened in Texas as well. We've adopted African American Studies, Mexican American Studies course. We're currently in the process of adopting an API and a Native American Studies or Indigenous Studies course as well. That will be available to our high school students, so we haven't quite yet built out a curriculum for K through 12. But these are all things that we're really working on when it comes to that cultural connectivity. But to bring a little bit of a different lens to it, right? One of the things, or two things that I was thinking about as I was listening to you all and the amazing speakers that have been addressing us all day is on two fronts. So the first is I love the idea about thinking about taking the holistic approach when we look at our young people in the classrooms, right? Our young scholars. But we haven't talked about taking the holistic approach when it comes to supporting the adults in the system. Everybody from our paraprofessionals, our auxiliary staff, to the master educators that are working in our schools that have aspirations to become administrators but don't have a pathway to get there because there are limitations in terms of access to resource. And so some of the things that I see happening across Texas right now are teacher residency programs that go above and beyond your typical certification programs. Typically, if you go through a certification program, you're in a class for the clinical time from about 6 to 9 months, and that's it. And then you're thrown into the water with the sharks, basically, without any kind of really formative practice and supervision and coaching. And so there are a couple of models in Texas right now that have rolled out pilot programs that have proven very successful. I'm from San Antonio, and I've been able to see the evolution of one in particular where there's a partnership between Texas A&M San Antonio and a nonprofit organization called the Cass Schools Network. And so what they've done is they have gone in, Cass Schools has gone into Texas A&M, pulled your educators, your undergrad students that are on their track for educator certification, and at year 2 in their program, put them in a classroom for the next 2 years and make sure that they have a mentor, they have coaches, that they're getting what we have in terms of an assessment is our TEAT tests. So making sure that it's a formative assessment as they're going through their program, identifying where there are perhaps some glitches in the way they're addressing pedagogy or methodology in the classroom. And then by the end of those 2 years in that residency program, now you've either really, coached up a strong educator that's ready to go out and just attack, right, and to do wonderful things for the students. Or you've confirmed for a student who realizes this is not for me, that maybe they need to go in a different direction. And now you've saved hundreds and hundreds of students from having to be in a classroom with an educator who perhaps doesn't belong in a classroom. So that, I think, for me was one thing. How do we really address the needs of the adults in the system that are there to support the young people in the system? The other part of it that I was thinking was collective impact work, I think, is really, really important. And I'm seeing that happen back home as well through an organization that has brought in a lot of different nonprofit organizations, specifically organizations that help education and institutions of education. So I'm thinking of Communities in Schools and City Year and just a number, Teach for America. All of these organizations have come together and shared best practices. And so there's a saying that my grandmother and my grandfather used to say, it's el burro trabaja dos veces. And so quite literally translated, the ass works twice as hard. And so what we're trying to accomplish by bringing all of these minds together that are trying to get to the same outcome is identifying where there's overlap in the work that we're doing, and perhaps streamlining that work so that we're not taking from each other different clients or customers, but truly building community around people who have needs that need to be met. And we have the wherewithal, we have the expertise. We just need a better pathway for delivering those resources.
Yeah. And those partnerships can be so powerful if they actually result in alignment and collaboration and a shared vision of what they're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to turn back to the students because we use the term relationship, right? And it's hard to pass a law to say there will be a relationship, right? I mean, it's something that has to happen. What does it take for a relationship to form with a teacher, for you to have a sense that, hey, this teacher cares about me, and I have enough comfort that I could go with them with a particular challenge that I might have. Kevin, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. I would say, first of all, going beyond that surface level, teachers, in order to best connect with a student, is the same as you work with any other relationship, building that level of trust between the student, between the teacher, showing that that teacher not only cares about that student academically, not making sure like, oh, are you getting A's, are you getting B's, but saying, how's your personal life going? I think Soliana mentioned it earlier, going beyond not caring about your academic success, but also outside of the school building, so showing your professional goals, your goals personally. I know personally, when I look back, having teachers in the different apprenticeship programs that I was doing in my school, whether it was dealing with being a reading tutor for different kids as a part of that apprenticeship, really connecting with that teacher mentor really helped to really build that level of trust, saying, oh, maybe you should try a different way to connect that student in their phonics, or like there are different ways, like different ways to be a better tutor for that student, and then really building that level of trust, saying, oh yeah, I can do that, and seeing the results. It really helps to build that level of trust, which then builds that relationship better.
Soliana, I want to build a little bit on what Kevin said, because part of it can be like an individual teacher can take the initiative to build a relationship, but sometimes it's a culture within a school. Yeah. Like you get the sense from the principal and all the teachers that they know those relationships are important. Do you have that sense did you have that sense in your high school, Soliana, or was it more a one-to-one sort of thing?
It varied.
Okay.
I think with relationships in my personal situation, I gained more relationships once I went on the board. Once I became successful is when teachers were reaching out, fellow students were reaching out. But prior to that, it was the complete opposite. And that's one of the things I take with me, was being in that position. Lots of students, the majority of students are in that position. And we start to look at the system and start to realize who is truly being uplifted in our school systems, in our classrooms. And you start to see it's oftentimes those students who are straight A's, those students who come from a higher socioeconomic status. And you see the direct correlation that has with community service, that has with what contribution that student has as soon as they leave the school building. And so when I think about that, it's you have to truly just reimagine what it means to be supportive of a student. And a lot of what that has to do is with accountability. And I believe a lot of teachers need to take accountability in that recognizing where, they haven't always been that person who reached every student, or the administration has to take accountability in not always supporting every student, or not always uplifting them. Because I can't go, the teacher can't say, I want to meet with you, I finally want to do this, and you're going to fully trust them already, like Kevin said. And so, I think it's oftentimes in this system, I feel like teachers and students are on the opposite side of the spectrum, and we're often being pulled together, whether that be by politics, or pulled apart, whether that be by politics or certain things. But realizing that, and luckily we have a teacher representative on our Board of Education too, and our relationship is so powerful. And that change, even though we are often, some of the most unheard stakeholders in the system, that relationship was so powerful, and the change we were able to make, and how that relationship, if it takes a lot of trust, if it takes a lot of just being honest with one another, confiding in what do you believe this system can be, then we'll truly be able to open up doors and start to think of ideas to progress.
Yeah, great. I want to build on the partnership theme and bring parents and families into the mix, right? Because they too can be huge components of this connectivity, scenario that we're painting. I don't know, Karen and Marisa, do you want to say a little bit about how that manifests itself in some of the public policy work you all are doing?
So I'm happy to go.
Go ahead.
So I'll say it manifests both positively and negatively if we're going to be very honest and have a candid conversation about this. So when we look across Texas, some of what we've seen, and I know there was some mention about the book banning that's happening, and some of there's a lot of action to remove board members across Texas right now, local school board members that are right now that behave with student centricism, right? Like they center students, they center educators, and right now it's more ideologically driven, unfortunately. And so you see parent PACs that are growing, and they tend to be a minority of parents, but a strong minority that are financially backed, and so there's that happening, and what I've seen is there's a lot of misinformation and a misunderstanding of how education institutions work and how governance is structured, and I think a lot of that is informing some of the negative movement. But on the positive side, you also have organizations, like there's a state organization in Texas, Mindshift Ed. And so this was established by two parents, one in a traditional public school setting and one in a charter public school setting, who said, we're not getting our needs met in either one of these institutions, so what are we going to do to demand action? Because our kids deserve everything that private and affluent school districts get. And so they have been pretty impactful and pretty powerful. They actually sit with legislators. Legislators give them time because they are well informed, they do their research, and they come with solutions to the conversations, which I think is also sets them apart from a lot of organizations, right? They're not just identifying problems, but they're bringing solutions to those problems that they're identifying. So much so, I mean, they've been incredibly impactful. They demanded attention from our Commissioner of Education in Texas, and they got it, and he's met with them several times now. And at the end of the day, what they're looking for is equity in terms of school funding, which is a problem across this country. In Texas in particular, we have issues with it, and it's a very complicated funding system that we deal with. But they're demanding attention and demanding equitable funding across all districts, because all of our kids, not just a particular segment of population, deserve to have access to high quality education and high expectations, because kids will meet those expectations.
And we talk about student voice and parent voice in advocacy for the needs of students. And sometimes that tends to get focused more on the academic, like access to AP classes or what have you. But I think just as important is the cultural and the other connectivity, shall we say, and that climate within the school, which goes back to Soliana's question. You said, I think you used the word accountability. When I think of accountability, I always think, well, there's got to be some measure that goes behind it. And yet these are really hard things to measure, although I know schools do climate surveys, and from time to time there are ways. Were any of those kinds of things happening in your school? Did they ever engage students on assessing the culture of the school, how safe students felt, whether they were feeling supported? Or Kevin, I don't know, in your school, did anybody ask those questions so they would have maybe harder data that could guide them in terms of how they create the support structures?
I guess I would tackle this question. I guess in the first 2 years I was at my high school, none of the support systems existed. But whenever we had to change leadership, it's that the student council met with the principal, met with different AP people, assistant principals, met with the lead teachers, and really took on that student advocacy to to make the whole school better in terms of adopting a common theme, together as one. Hubs Together as One was our theme, and then really extending that connection between the student council, the student people representatives who were elected by the students of the school. With the administration, it led to a more positive and welcoming school community, and that motto was carried throughout the different classrooms. You could see a continuation of that theme, together as one, saying that as teachers, administrators, and students, we're not separated, but we're all bonded together by a common theme, and that extends to everywhere. So really taking that school from a school that was somewhat segmented to really bring that school together as not just a school that can educate, but a school that has a great community around it.
Excellent, excellent. Soliana, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of schools settle for what's mandated. And
interesting,
what's mandated in Kentucky is the semester survey or something along with your standardized tests, I believe. And you take that every semester and that's pretty much it. And you don't receive results, you don't talk about what you wrote or what you said, and that's pretty much it in input. And then, you have the other side to it is okay, what if the administration does finally want input? Most of the time, they won't reach all students. There's this hierarchy there that they'll go to the National Honor Society or they'll go to the student body president. And so it automatically just disvalues those students who, experience the inequities in the school system, the students who have the hardest time, and the students who need support the most. And so when I think about, to me and to so many other students, that's a foreign approach, and that's actually something that a group of students have connected on across Kentucky. We actually called it the Lieutenant Governor Mental Health Action Summits, where we partnered with the governor's administration. Nice. And one of our policies is to at least have these conversations monthly, if that. And not just a semesterly approach.
Right. And maybe use that, put that, if the data exists, put it to good use. What does it actually show? Or share it out and have conversations around it. Great, great, great.
Hal, I think so much of how parents and community engage with school gets informed by sort of what their own experience was with schools. And so many times, we've got the range of parents who feel very empowered and have no problem accessing the halls of power and requesting and demanding what feels right for their learner. And then you've got the whole range of folks who don't feel empowered in that way, which very much may go back to their own experience of what it was like to be the learner in the building, and whether they felt like there was voice or not, or whether they felt a sense of belonging there or not. And so I think thinking about that when we're attempting to be very intentional about the ways in which we engage parent voice, the ways in which we engage student voice, so that the generation of learners right now can grow up with a feeling of a different experience, so that when they perhaps are parents can engage on the behalf of their children differently. We had some wonderful things led by the student members on our state board to engage student voice and decision making around things like how the COVID relief money was going to be spent, and students designed a very interactive process using the digital tools that young people feel very comfortable with to generate ideas across school districts across Connecticut, and then students were able to vote on the ideas and really determine how those COVID relief, a portion of that COVID relief money was going to be spent. And it was led by our student board members, implemented throughout districts across, and really elevated student voice in that way.
Beautiful.
We're in the midst of doing our next 5-year plan and want to make sure that we get parent voice, community voice in the same sorts of ways, and are being very intentional about how we reach out, thinking about the communities that don't feel included and are tend to be marginalized, how we're getting it out in different languages and different modalities in different settings, so that we're engaging parent voice differently as well.
And what I love is when a state board does it, it then models it for districts and schools that maybe, as Soliana says, going through the motions, when they really actually need to get genuine about student voice and its meaning and how powerful it is, parent voice and so forth and so on. And when you do it at the state level, it sends that kind of signal. Yeah.
I mean, we have to go so overboard because for too long we've not been good at that.
Yeah.
And I think
absolutely.
the pendulum has to swing very far to the other end in order to really build a sense of trust, really feel like you really want to hear what I have to say, you're really interested in my voice is going to matter. I think we really have to sort of oversample,
Yeah, yeah.
in order to make up for years of folks really feeling cut out from it.
Well, and I love it when students get together and say, you know what, we're going to be a little bit louder. We are,
Yeah.
we're going to talk among ourselves, put together some sort of, commentary, reflection on what's happening in our school in the interest of making it better for ourselves, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So, in the last few minutes, I asked them to come away with
Okay.
one idea of something that they could do differently. So I'm going to ask each of you to suggest something to them. And in the audience, you've got people who are with advocacy organizations, education organizations. You've got some students. You've got some people who are educators. You've got some business people. You've got some foundations. What do you think when they leave today about this topic? What maybe might they do? I'm going to work my way down the line,
Okay.
starting with Marisa.
Yes. So I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the concept of subtractive education, subtractive schooling. It's something that in the South and Southwest we've experienced a lot as a Latina from Texas. One of the things that my family, thinking about what Karen was saying about familial experiences, linguistic culture was taken from my family, from my community down in the South. And we have a generation of young people who are not afraid to speak up in the ways that even my generation, I'm not that far removed, I'd like to believe, from the current generation of students, but they're unafraid. And so for those decision makers in the room, invite young people. I think it was David Spicer earlier who spoke on the panel before us that mentioned that students are pretty smart. And you know what? I think that it takes some humbling of adults to quiet ourselves and to really listen to student voice and make it actionable. So invite them to the table, because if not, these young people are going to make their way on the table, and they'll be angry when they come at you with it. So instead, create those invitations. And then when those invitations have been authentically delivered, then authentically take their advice and their suggestions and put it into action, because it's time that we give them the trust and that we give them the action.
So if you're part of an organization and you do have no way that you're gauging student voice, put that on your list. Have a conversation about how you might do it and do something about it. Karen?
So pretty early in my career, I switched from direct clinical service into policy work because I wanted to be less about the work of trying to fix young people that had been broken by systems that weren't working for us, and work to try to build systems that work. And so I have been working in the field of affordable housing forever. So I will never be in front of an audience like this of influencers without putting in a real plug for urging you to go back to your communities and think about the ways in which housing and education policy have been used to create opportunity for some, but to marginalize and block so many from opportunity, and encourage you to be thoughtful about things like housing zoning and school districting and school funding and how that's connected to whether we're actually being equitable. And equitable means having shifting things in a way to put to ensure that those who've been marginalized for too long actually get an opportunity and get access. So I encourage you to go back and look at your own town, your own cities, housing and education policy through an equity lens, and think about ways in which you can really push to create communities that are equitable, and as a result, schools that are equitable.
And that ultimately meet the needs of the whole child, and that wraps it in beautifully. Soliana?
I really hold power in intergenerational relationships and that partnership, because being on the board, I am the youngest and it shows a lot of the time. But the ideas that we're able to bounce off of, the expertise that they have, the expertise that I have, just the different perspectives that we have as two different stakeholders in the system is really important. And then that also ties into partnerships and leveraging that expertise that we get from both sides and making that impact our work in the long run. And so we have to set up a structure, whether that be in our organizations, in our advocacy work, for this long-term student voice idea that truly partners with students and and uplifts student voice and does just all the things, because I think the power of mitigating these large debates that we have in public education, a lot of the time it's because students aren't at the forefront. And that's probably a big reason in why these debates go on for so long. And so I always prioritize for students to work alongside other people in official roles. Not only I'm going to meet with you on this week, and so that's really important. And also making that a foundation for everything you do moving forward.
Nice, nice. And again, if you're sitting here thinking, I don't know how to go about getting access to student voice, call me, call my organization. There are several other organizations in the room that speak to student voice. There are tools out there that can help you see exactly what that looks like. All right, Kevin, you're going to wrap us up, and then we're going to close out.
So similar to Soliana, I would say, as an organization, as leaders within communities, within leaders within states, I encourage you to sometimes separate yourselves from the other adults around you and actually go within a school. I can tell you, probably, show of hands, how many people have been within a school building in the last year? Yeah. So I encourage you to actually go within and don't just like do a flyby, but actually stay within the school. Talk to students. Like Soliana says, those who are the most marginalized, those students who need the most resources, they're often not talk to you. Talk to different students within it and see actually what is that environment like, and then reflect on what you can do as an organization to actually connect with those people more, connect with students more. Because as Soliana says, a lot of the issues that we're facing today, students have known about them, and students can give you a lot of insight and a lot of solutions to combat the situation they're actually living in. People always say lived experience is number one in a lot of things you do. So I would definitely say that.
Echoing Secretary Duncan's observations about students. Please join me in thanking this exceptional panel.
Thank you.